This is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. I'm speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am Hebrew Nations. Our organisation, Hebrew Nations, recognises that the lost 10 tribes are amongst Western nations. And we encourage or endeavour to implant in our followers and those who are interested in this subject to recognise that they are descended from the 10 tribes of Israel, that the 10 tribes of Israel are amongst Western peoples, to realise it by encouraging the support for the state of Israel and also enhancing their own biblical consciousness, and also repentance, to repent and to become better people and to help others. So these are the three R's of Hebrew nations: recognition, realization, repentance. And as we said, we study the lost 10 tribes of Israel, we prove where the lost 10 tribes are, we show that they are amongst Western nations, and we use proofs from the Bible, from rabbinical sources, from archaeology, in other words from both biblical and from secular fields of study. And this is what we do. This is what we concentrate upon, and propagating this knowledge and bringing it to the recognition and the availability of the public. So now we're about to discuss a question that arose concerning the lost 10 tribes having been in Egypt. The lost 10 tribes of Israel, they are the 12 tribes of Israel who separated from Judah. Originally the 12 tribes of Israel, these 12 tribes of Israel separated, divided into two different sections. The kingdom of Judah was in the south, the kingdom of Israel of the 10 tribes was in the north. The northern kingdom was captured by the Assyrians. The Assyrians conquered it, and they took away the inhabitants, the Israelite inhabitants of that land, into different sections of the Assyrian Empire. And in their places of exile, these Israelites lost consciousness of their identity, but they remained more or less together in coherent, cohesive groups, and eventually migrated to the north and to the west, converging in areas of Western Europe where their descendants are now to be found, including those who originated in Western Europe, such as the peoples of North America, Australia, New Zealand, and related nations. So this is the answer to the question is. The answer to the subject is clearly that the lost 10 tribes were taken away by the Assyrians, and that is what happened to them. They went to Assyria, and from there they disappeared. But here and there are biblical passages that Egypt was also involved, and so we had a question. Someone asked us, were the lost 10 tribes also taken to Egypt? So we repeat, the answer is that they were mainly taken to by Assyrians to portions of the Assyrian Empire. Some of them apparently also ended up in Egypt, and we'll discuss how this happened and what the significance of it is. And this is quite interesting, because incidentally we'll also refresh our memories as to what happened to the lost 10 tribes shortly after they were exiled, and how they came to take control of the Assyrian Empire for a period, and everything that resulted from these incidents. We remember, to refresh your memory, that the lost 10 tribes had been part of that kingdom of Israel that had separated from Judah, and in the period from, according to conventional dates, these dates might have to be changed, but we are going according to dates that are accepted by mainstream scholars. So according to conventionally accepted dates, from about 730 BCE to 720 BCE, the lost 10 tribes, or the 10 tribes, were taken away in stages, taken away to portions of the Assyrian Empire. Archaeological evidence shows that Samaria, which was the centre, the capital, both the centre and the capital of the 10 tribe kingdom before its exile, that this area had been subject to heavy cultural influence from Egypt. It had been was Egyptian in some ways, in its depictions of Egyptian gods, and in its modes of expression, decoration, and so on, shows heavy Egyptian influence. So but all events, those who took them away, the Assyrians. The Assyrians also took away many from the tribes of Judah. They attacked Judah and captured many of its outlying cities and took away many of its inhabitants. And these inhabitants of Judah were taken away later linked up in their places of exile with the 10 tribes that became part of the 10 tribes. But nevertheless, the 10 tribes are considered 10 tribes because Judah was to give expression to itself as Judah with those Jews who had remained behind in Jerusalem. In other words, the remnants of Judah that remained in the land of Judah were the ones who gave expression to Judah as a coherent entity, aware of its identity and giving expression to it. In addition to the Assyrians taking the Israelites away to different portions of the Assyrian Empire, we have records. The Bible speaks of it. Also, the Talmud speaks of it. Archaeological and other records also speak about it, and lots of times taking away different portions of the Assyrian Empire. But in addition to that, the Assyrians used Phoenicians from the city of Tyre. Phoenicians who then had a strong maritime empire and interests throughout the Mediterranean and also the West Atlantic regions. The Assyrians used them. The Assyrians had conquered the city of Tyre, and so they used them, and they also used the Philistines. The Philistines were centered in the southwest of the land of Israel, joining Judah. But the Assyrians had also conquered them, took over them, and in addition to them being in their own area of Philistia, the southwest to the southwest of Judah, they were also part of the Minoan civilization centered on Crete and also linked with Cyprus, and they too were parallel to the Phoenicians, had interests in the West Atlantic areas and the Western Mediterranean, and the Assyrians also used them, as the book of Amos tells us, that these two were used to take Israelites away, and they took Israelites away to Spain, and to Gaul, that is present-day France, and to the British Isles. And later, these areas was also to be reached by other Israelites who moved overland. But at all events, this is what happened in the east, in the area of the land of Israel. And the 10 tribes had been taken away mainly by Assyria. This was in as we said, 730, 720 BCE. So about 140 years later, or a little bit around about that time, and about 586 BCE, or give or take a few years, the Babylonians conquered Judah. The Babylonians had succeeded on from the Assyrians. The Babylonians conquered Judah, and they took the inhabitants of Judah away in exile to Babylon. Babylon was a neighbor of Assyria, and they took the Jews away to Babylon. They left a few Jews behind, and these Jews fled. They fled even though they had been placed on trust, as if to say. But nevertheless, they became afraid. They were misled, and these Jews fled to Egypt. In Egypt, they were overtaken by the Babylonians, who also conquered Egypt. So that is, and these events are spoken about in the book of Kings, and also in the book of Jeremiah. Later, the Persians conquered the Babylonians and allowed the Jews to return. The Jews returned to Judah and rebuilt the temple, and the land, over a period of time, they managed to reassert themselves and to develop the land. After several centuries of wars and all kinds of changes that took place, the Romans gained control of Judah and they ruled over it. Eventually the Jews rebelled against the Romans. As a result, the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, and they exiled the Jews in several ways. The first one was after the destruction of the Second Temple. That was in about 70 CE. And then later there was another rebellion under Bar Kokhba in 115 BC CE, and then again another rebellion in 130 CE. After these rebellions, the Romans destroyed Judea and caused the Jews to be dispersed, and also took many thousands of Jews away as slaves. And they, amongst other things, they transported the Jews to Egypt, where they were sold as slaves, and as a result there was an oversupply in the market, in the slave market, and there was hardly anyone willing to even buy these slaves. And this had been prophesied. It was prophesied in Deuteronomy 28 verse 68. And we have an article on this subject showing how this prophecy, which was in the Bible, was fulfilled in the time of the Romans. We also have the Book of Lamentations. The Book of Lamentations was written by Jeremiah. It describes mainly the destruction of the temple and the resulting calamities that overfell the Jews by the Babylonians. It also refers to what had previously occurred under Assyria against the 10 tribes. And then here and there it also mentions other points that were fulfilled more later, one can say, in the time of the Romans. So this is, and so both from these sources, Deuteronomy 28, in the Book of Lamentations, we have proof of prophecy, and this is interesting. Returning to what we were told about the lost 10 tribes, the question, remember, the subject of our talk now is concerning lost 10 tribes having been in Egypt, whether they were or not, and the events around it. So, returning to what we were saying, the 10 tribes had been exiled by the Assyrian monarchs, had been exiled by the Assyrians, so taken away in stages. The first one was probably Tiglath-Pileser, 745 to 727 BCE. Was followed by Shalmaneser, 726-723 BCE, and he by Sargon, 722-705 BCE. And Sargon was probably the last one who exiled the Israelites from the 10 tribes of Israel. He was followed by Sennacherib in 705-681 BC. He exiled many of the Jews, and others, possibly some from the tribe of Simeon, who were connected with lost 10 tribes but were in the south, and perhaps had not been taken away by the previous Assyrian monarchs. At all events, Sennacherib exiled many hundreds of thousands from this area, and one source says that those he exiled were from the tribe of Simeon. Others indicate that they were from Judah. At all events, the exiles taken away by Sennacherib also joined up and became identified with the lost 10 tribes, with the 10 tribes of Israel. And Sennacherib was followed by Esarhaddon, 680 to 66, 680 to 669 BCE. And Esarhaddon, he consolidated the Assyrian conquests. He also conquered Egypt. And according to that, by the time of Esarhaddon, most of the 10 tribes, all of the 10 tribes in fact, had already been taken away into exile. So, and before then, they could not, the Assyrians could not have placed them in Egypt, according to this, because they did not control Egypt until later. But we will see this is not so black and white as it sounds, but it is a point. The point is that the Egyptians could not have the Assyrians could not have placed the Israelites in Egypt before the time of Esarhaddon, because they did not control Egypt until that time. And by the time of Esarhaddon, most of the 10 tribes had already been exiled. But there may have been another possibility, is that the Assyrians had exiled the Israelites to different portions of the Assyrian Empire, and then because of different troubles and so on, they had taken a portion of them away from where they had already been exiled and moved them to Egypt. And there are parallels. There were parallels to this. There were occasions when this did happen with Assyrian exile, so it is another possibility. So we'll return to the history in a minute. This historical outline, because it has something to say. It is interesting and it is important, and it also answers our question. But now let us consider the biblical evidence. What does the Bible say? Zechariah 10, I'll also bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria, and I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon until no more room is found for them. So here we have this verse referring to the tribes of Israel, to Ephraim, as we see from previous verses in Zechariah 10. And you're saying that they will return from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. So this indicates that there were 10 tribes. We know that they were taken away by Assyria, but this also indicates that Egypt may somehow or other have also been involved. And we also find a similar message in Hosea 9. Hosea 9 verse 3 says, "They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt and shall eat unclean things in Assyria." So here we now, Hosea predicting the exile of the 10 tribes of Israel, and he's referring both to Egypt and to Assyria. And we'll see what the commentary of the Radak Rabbi David Kimhi is an important commentator in the medieval period, and he said, "But Ephraim shall return to Egypt," quoting this verse, and he says, the scripture had already said, "For the Egyptians whom you see today you shall not see again no more forever," in Exodus 14:13. So too in the biblical curses, "And the Lord will take you back to Egypt in ships, by the way of which I said to you, you shall never see it again. Now you shall be offered for sale to your enemies, as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you." So we saw that this had been, or was to be fulfilled in the time of the Romans. At all events, going back to Egypt is not a pretty picture, not something that the Israelites wanted to, or should have wanted to do. And anyway, so the Radak continues his explanation. He says, "Even though the kingdom of Ephraim meaning the 10 tribes of Israel, Ephraim was the leading tribe in the northern kingdom of Israel, and sometimes it is referred to as the kingdom of Ephraim, or just as Ephraim in biblical terminology." So he says, even though the kingdom of Ephraim was exiled by Assyria, and many of them before the exile returned to Egypt due to the famine and troubles of overtaking them in their own land. So he says apparently they were at war with Assyria. Assyria had put the cities of Samaria under siege. Assyria was conquering the land, massacring the people, and also driving them away, taking them away into other areas. So many of them may have fled to Egypt, which is apparently what did take place. He also says, so this is what the Radak suggests, he also says that the survivors from Mitsraim, together with those of the remnant of Judah and Benjamin, who went to Egypt despite having been warned in the name of the Almighty not to do so by Jeremiah. He is referring to the fact that after the conquest of the northern kingdom by Assyria and the exile of its inhabitants, and after that, as we said, the Babylonians conquered Judah, and they exiled the people of Judah. So he says there may also have been remnants or survivors or refugees from the northern kingdom of Israel who had gone to the south, gone to the area of the kingdom of Judah. And when this kingdom of Judah was conquered by the Babylonians and its inhabitants also exiled, so those refugees from Ephraim who were already there would also have been taken to exile, and there was a remnant from the inhabitants of Judah who fled to Egypt from the Babylonians. And amongst this remnant, these few refugees, this small minority, there may have also been survivors from the kingdom of Ephraim. And the commentary of Abarbanel, he repeats what the Radak says, and he also adds, "So some of Ephraim went back to Egypt, the land of their enemies, to their great shame and sorrow. Most, however, were exiled to Assyria, and in Assyria are at impure feuds in their places of exile under hard masters." So this is it, this is the bottom line. Most of the Israelites were taken away by the Assyrians, and the northern tribes is linked up with the Assyrians, but somehow or other also apparently made it to Egypt. And we have other biblical verses. We'll go through them and see what they say. And these biblical verses also indicate that the lost 10 tribes were exiled to Assyria and also to be found in Egypt. Though the commentaries in these cases say that where it refers to Egypt, he was referring to exiles from Judah, and when he refers to Assyria, he's referring to the 10 tribes. So sometimes both opinions may have something to them. We've already seen that the Radak and the Abarbanel agree with the assessment of the biblical verses that there were at least some of the 10 tribes who are to be associated with Judah. And so we have at all events, and let's read these verses very quickly. Isaiah 27 verse 13 says, "So shall be in that day the great trumpet, that the great shofar will be blown. They will come about to perish in the land of Assyria," that is, those who were lost in the land of Assyria, Avdim in Hebrew, who were being lost in the land of Assyria, and they who were outcast in the land of Egypt, and we shall worship the Lord in the holy mount of Jerusalem. So to Hosea 7, he says Ephraim is also like Hosea 7 verse 11. Ephraim is also like a silly dove without sense. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. Wherever they go, I spread my net on them. I'll bring them down like birds of the air. I will chastise them according to what their congregation has heard. So here too we have the exiles, Ephraim, going to both Assyria and to Egypt. In Isaiah 11 it says, shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the lands of the sea. So this could refer to both the exiles of Judah and of the 10 tribes, but we have a source that indicates that it is primarily referring to the 10 tribes who will return from these areas. And so here we have it. We have indications from the Bible, but the lost 10 tribes were to be found not only in Assyria but also in Egypt. But it's not that simple. This too is not that simple because as we shall see, by Egypt it could also mean other areas, not necessarily the place we know as Egypt today. Getting back to our history, we got up to Esarhaddon, who had conquered Egypt and consolidated the Assyrian conquest in that region. After Esarhaddon there came Ashurbanipal, 669 to 627 BCE, and Ashurbanipal completed the conquest of Egypt and strengthened the hold of Assyria on Egypt. He also fought against numerous enemies. Assyria was being besieged by numerous opponents at that time. Towards the end of his life, Ashurbanipal made an alliance with the Scythians. Originally the Scythians had been a people whom we identify as Israelites. They'd been subjects of the Assyrians together with the Cimmerians, and they had been subjects, as we said, of Assyria. So they had asserted their independence, became independent, and they had become a strong force in that region. And Ashurbanipal made an alliance with them against his other enemies. And towards the end of his life, the Scythians progressed from being allies to, in effect, taking control of the Assyrian Empire. They set up a center in Beth-Chan in the former land of Israel. They attempted to reunite with Judah. At that time, Judah was ruled by King Yoshia, son of Ammon, 649-609 BC. King Yoshia was of the house of David. He was the ruler of Judah, and he spread his rule over the former area of Israel, and he apparently was recognized by the Scythians as some type of a suzerain over them, as we find from inscriptions. And he attempted to bring the 10 tribes back, and he set up colonies in his own land, in the former land of Israel, also in the area of the Philistines, and perhaps also on the area in regions bordering Egypt. At all events, the Scythians had some type of control over, at this stage, over the empire of Assyria. They held this control for about 28 years, but then they began to weaken, and the Assyrians reasserted themselves. And all this time the Assyrians were fighting amongst each other. There are 3 different claimants to the throne of Assyria, and their enemies were closing in on them constantly. Babylon, the city of Babylon, which had been very important in the Assyrian Empire, rebelled, and together with the Medes they began to attack Assyria, to launch serious attacks against Assyria altogether. Remember, at this stage, the Scythians more or less controlled the empire, but it was not a complete control. They had a de facto rulership, one could say, over good portions of it. By about 620 BCE, the Chaldean Nebuchadnezzar took control of Babylon. He became the king of Babylon, and the Medes, together with the Babylonians, made a coalition against Assyria. The coalition of the Medes included Cimmerians, Persians, Edomites, and others. The Cimmerians were also partly of Israelite origin, as we explained elsewhere. And the Babylonians and Medes, they attacked Assyria in 616 BCE. The Scythians were called to the help of Assyria, but they changed sides. Most cities of Assyria were destroyed by these coalitions in 616 to 608 BCE. And the Scythians played a major role in destroying the Assyrian cities. As we said, the Scythians in this case were mainly of Israelite origin. They were Israelites from the 10 tribes of Israel, who had become attached to the confederation to which the Scythians belonged, and they had become the major dominant element in this confederation. and they had in effect become the Scythians. And Micah chapter 5 describes the role of the Scythians and the Israelites in the downfall of Assyria. Remember Micah chapter 5, it describes how the Israelites became, first they were subjects and they were allies, then they were the destroyers of Assyria, and Micah attributes this role to the Assyrians, to the Israelites, to Ephraim, and in effect historically it was fulfilled by the Scythians, who were Israelites. So the Assyrians were beaten and defeated and many of their cities destroyed, but a remnant of them continued to resist, especially in Haran, in northern Syria, until about 608 BCE. Meanwhile, the Egyptians, whilst all this was going on, the Egyptians had asserted their independence from Assyria and once again become a powerful nation in the region, and they decided to help Assyria because, due to the balance of power, they decided it would be in their interests to resist this northern coalition of powers which could eventually threaten them. So they decided to resist it and to help the Assyrians. And Pharaoh Necho from Egypt marched northwards. He marched northwards to help the Assyrians, or the remnant of the Assyrians. And on the way, King Josiah of Judah met him at Megiddo, and Megiddo in the northern area of Israel, and fought against the Egyptians, and King Josiah was killed. And before Josiah went to fight the Egyptians, he had received a message, as we are told in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verse 20 to 22. We are told after all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. But he, that is Pharaoh Necho, sent messengers to him, saying, "What I have to do with you, king of Judah? I have not come against you this day, but against the house with which I have war. For God commanded me to make haste. Refrain from meddling with God who is with me, lest he destroy you." Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself that he might fight with him, and did not hear the words of Necho from the mouth of God. So he came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And as we saw in the valley of Megiddo, he was killed. King Josiah was killed fighting in effect on behalf of the Scythians. And Pharaoh had said he had not come to fight against Judah, but against the house with which I have war. As we said, 2 Chronicles 35:21, but against the house with which I have war. And Pharaoh was fighting against the Scythians and their allies, and used this expression against the house with which I have war. And this warning was from the mouth of God, as the Torah, as the Bible tells us. We know the people of Israel had been divided in two houses: the house of Israel in the north, the 10 tribes, and the house of Judah in the south, the Jews, the ancestors of the Jews. And so we have this expression, the house with which I have war, is distinguishing between two houses of Israel. The northern house of the 10 tribes of Israel, the house of Israel, and the house of Judah. And Pharaoh was recognizing that there were two houses of Israel, two separate houses of Israel, and that is how things have continued until our time. Eventually these two separate houses of Judah and Israel will reunite and become one house of Israel, as predicted in Ezekiel 37. And in other biblical verses. At all events, we identify the lost 10 tribes, at least a portion of them, with the Scythians, or as a portion of the Scythians. We have articles, we have books, talks on this subject, and we have a lot of proof concerning it. There's a great deal of evidence. The Israelites were identified or identifiable as Scythians. There are indications that Scythian colonies at some stage were established in Egypt. And there were Israelites amongst the Scythian forces, and so maybe in this way as well that Israelites eventually did find their way to Egypt. Another point is that what we know today as Egypt is not necessarily the Egypt of the Bible. The border of the land of Israel, according to the Bible, reaches from the river of Egypt, that is from the Nile River, to the Euphrates River. So the border of the land of Israel, the promised land of Canaan, which the Israelites were promised to be their eternal possession, reaches from the Nile River. The Nile River starts off in Africa, in the mountains of Africa. It flows through the red and white Nile converge flowing down through the desert, through Egypt, reaching the Mediterranean Sea. Before they reach the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile splits up into several branches, creating an estuary. When these different branches are the end is where the Nile reaches the Mediterranean. According to one opinion quoted by the Rabbi of Lubavitch, the previous Rabbi of Chabad, the deceased Rabbi, the recently deceased Rabbi, the opinion that he quoted said that incidentally he quoted this word just before the Yom Kippur War. There was something propitious in the timing of this verse, and he said that the western border of Israel was opposite Alexandria. The city of Alexandria is on the western bank of the western branch of the Nile River. In other words, up until that point, extended the borders of the promised land of Israel. And all of that area from there, from the Nile River to the east, was the region of Goshen, which had been given to the Israelites by Pharaoh when they came down to Egypt in the time of Joseph. And archaeologically, in archaeological sense, for long periods of time, this whole area is considered by archaeologists to be Canaanite and Middle Eastern in its characteristics and its culture, and not really Egyptian. And so in this way too, Israelites did at different stages control this area. They did rule over it. They considered it part of the land of Israel, and they may well have dwelt there. And when the Egyptians took it over, so they would have been incorporated in the area of Egypt. So there still is a possibility. Returning to our narrative, we saw how King Josiah of Judah was defeated by Necho. After defeating King Josiah, King Necho, Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, he continued northwards. He linked up with what remained of the Assyrians. Most of them, many of them at least, had been defeated and massacred or dispersed. He linked up with what remained of them, but they lost a battle at Haran. They were defeated by the Babylonians, by the Medes, and also by the Scythians. In 605 BCE, the Babylonians and Medes defeated the Egyptians and Assyrians at Carchemish. And all this while, the Scythians, who included Cimmerians, actually the Scythians had emerged from the Cimmerians, so one and the same people in many ways. At some stage, the Medes invited the Scythian leaders to a banquet, to a feast, and when they were all drunk, they killed them all. And in other words, they betrayed them and tried to displace them and take over the leading, and became themselves the leading element in this section of the coalition with the Babylonians. The Medes and Babylonians then divided the Assyrian Empire between them, even though large sections of Cimmerians and Scythians remained in the north. But over the following centuries, even centuries that took a long time, the Scythians and Cimmerians and related peoples, many of whom were Israelites, were pushed further to the north. They were pushed into the region of southern Russia, which became known as Scythia. They were also pushed into southeast Europe, and from these areas they moved westward and to the north into Scandinavia, and eventually reaching the British Isles. At all events, we had leading the Babylonians, we had Nebuchadnezzar from Chaldea, and he was followed by his son Nebuchadnezzar in 605-562 BCE. And Nebuchadnezzar also pushed the Israelites further to the north, as we have said, and Nebuchadnezzar also attacked Judah. He destroyed the first temple, he burnt the first temple, and exiled most of the population of Judah, once again in stages, to Babylon. He left the remnant behind, on good faith, as if to say left them behind, but they disobeyed the warnings of Jeremiah, and they fled to Egypt. Later, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar conquered Egypt, so those Jews who were in there were overtaken by the Babylonians once more. Eventually, the Persians, as we said, we had the Medes and the Babylonians had split the empire between them, split the Assyrian empire between them. The Medes had included the Persians and Elamites and other peoples in their confederation. Eventually, the Persians displaced the Medes as the major power in this confederation. Henceforth, it became Persian. The Persians conquered Babylon from the Babylonians, took over the Babylonian Empire, and Cyrus the Persian allowed the Jews to return to the land of Judah, which they did, and they began to rebuild the country. And so we have this return of Judah to its land at the first time. So, and eventually, as we said, the Jews rebuilt their land, and they remained there until the Romans destroyed the second temple, which they had rebuilt, and once again dispersed them, and until they remained in the areas of the diaspora, of the dispersal, until recently, when today they once again began to return to the land of Israel, and more than half the Jews, or the Jewish population of the world, now dwells in the land of Israel. And this is significant, and the lost 10 tribes are also dispersed, but rather unlike the Jews, who were dispersed and scattered, the lost 10 tribes remained together as units of peoples, and they became the Western nations, or the leading elements, or that element amongst the Western nations who gave them their national characteristics, and they still remain there. The descendants are still there. Most of them do not know that they are descended from lost 10 tribes, and that is what our organisation, Hebrew Nations, endeavours to impart to them, this knowledge, and this is important, and it should be known. And there are other points, a few more points are that the name Egypt in Hebrew, or also in Assyrian and Akkadian, which is a language used by the Assyrians and also by the Babylonians on occasion, the word for Egypt in Hebrew is Mitsraim. It's Mitsraim. In Akkadian it's Mitsraim, which is similar, and there were regions known by this name to the north of Assyria, around the Caucasus area, on the foothills of the Caucasus, and also further east. There's the debates whether there were one or several areas known by this term, and there were traditions that the Egyptians had planted colonies in this area. At all events, the name was used for northern regions, and it may be also that the Bible also applies the name Mitsraim to such regions, because in some of these regions, Israelite captives from the 10 tribes had been settled, and we have spoken about this elsewhere. It is important because there are also biblical prophecies concerning the return of Israel from these regions, or via these regions, and it is worth knowing. Another point is that a description of the Assyrian Empire, we have in our description of the Assyrian Empire, we may have given the impression that Assyria was weaker than it was. Assyria was actually very strong throughout this period. It may be analogous to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, even though it was falling, it was decaying and falling, it took a long time over doing so, and it was very powerful throughout all this period, right up to the very end, and there were occasions in which the Romans could be fighting for their life right up close to home, whereas thousands of miles away they were making progress and establishing facts on the ground. So too the Assyrians had become a powerful nation, the most powerful nation on the earth. They tried to take over all of the mineral production, and the trade in minerals, and they used Phoenicians and the Philistines in doing so. And indications are that the silver mines and tin mines in Spain, tin in Cornwall in England, copper in Wales, gold in Ireland, and so on, were all projects undertaken by the Assyrians, and the Assyrians were using Israelite exiles in doing so. And this is important because it shows that there was an early movement, a forced movement of Israelites to this area. And at another stage and another time we will go into this in more detail. A further point worth mentioning is that Irish and Scottish traditions say that their ancestors, or a portion of their ancestors, were Scythians or Israelites or both, and that they had also sojourned in Egypt before moving to the British Isles. And this ties in with the possibility or the probability, actually it's not the probability, it's the fact that some of the Israelites had been exiled to Egypt, apart from those who had been taken away by the Assyrians. Thank you.